So I want to start by very briefly touching upon the structure of this little talk. I have just about a little bit of information, one slide which talks at a very high level about the global R&D trends. Then we move on to some innovations by publishers. The ones that I will show here are those mostly which Springer Nature has done, because those are the ones that I'm most comfortable talking about and the most familiar with, obviously. And we end with some of the broader research trends in STM publishing. A word of explanation here when talking about research trends. It's not the normal research material that you publish, but here we're talking about what publishers invest in terms of doing their own research and development processes, which is actually the focus of this talk. And out here, I will cover very briefly our commitment and drive towards open science processes and the open science paradigm, amplifying sustainable development goals, in which Springer Nature is also very heavily invested, and our support for early career researchers. First, on global R&D trends. So when I received the topic actually from Mrs. Soundararajan and the organizing committee and also my colleagues at Springer Nature, I was actually quite thrilled to speak on it. Although I had to pause for a second and think what exactly I would need to put into this. The reason is that everyone knows that R&D output, etc., powers all of the world's product development, research, everything that you discover, everything that is around you. But what is actually the contribution of publishers towards R&D? In fact, in a niche industry such as academic publishing, while we do serve a great scientific community globally, at the end of the day, our domain is actually quite a small one. When you take the whole of the R&D investment and R&D expenditure globally. So it is obviously a primary enabler, if not a driver of productivity and successful innovation, no matter where it is. It depends a lot on the R&D investments that go into it. I just want to talk about, at a very high level, a few figures, just to give you a perspective about how academic publishing and STM publishing looks within that global R&D world. 2009, and these figures I sort of compiled from a collection of STM associations reports. 2009, the R&D spent globally was about 1.3 trillion US dollars. It rose to 2019 to approximately 2 trillion. The entire STM publishing market size in 2020 globally, taking everybody in it, was about 26.5 billion. It actually came down a little bit because of the corona pandemic. It is slated to grow a little bit more in the coming years, but roughly that is what you're talking about. The projections or forecasts for 2021, journals and books, the main components of or vehicles of dissemination for scientific content, we have about 9.5 and 3.2 billion respectively. Taken all together, this will approximate only about 1% the entire STM publishing market, out of which we have to find the components for investing in R&D, etc. We'll probably aim to only about 1.3, only about 1% or 1.3% of that entire amount invested in R&D expenditure. So we are very small. Nevertheless, we play an important part, and some of the developments that publishers themselves do is what you will basically see in the slides that are going forward. I just want to draw your attention very briefly to the chart here. Again, it is from the recent STM report supplement which came out, but that shows sort of the research intensity in terms of researchers, journals, and articles published globally. And this is always a good metric to look at when you're looking at how much R&D expenditure actually translates into knowledge creation mechanisms, which scientists and researchers write in and publish. And you can see the strong positions that the US, for instance, has. India is also on the chart, but of course, at the far right corner, the growth of China, which obviously will affect this, how we move forward in everything in the next 5 years or so. And that is a very, very significant development. Very broadly, I want to now look at some of the innovations that we had at Shri over the past few years. Most of this is in the area of the books business, which I work in, but of course, some of it is also connected to our journal portfolio. So what has been the sort of driving philosophy behind the development of further technologies or mechanisms to assist our core user groups? These are, of course, authors and readers. We've started to invest, and quite consistently so, in the adoption of digital and especially AI-driven processes to promote publishing innovation. A lot of our developments now touch upon or use artificial intelligence-related tools to develop these. The focus is very clearly on what is called user-centric approaches, so what the users, authors, as well as researchers and readers can benefit from. And it is very much solutions focused in terms of how you identify the core problems that authors, researchers, and scientists need to solve when they are communicating their discoveries. And we've tried to develop tools which they can use. The key thing, or the key concept that we first had to overcome is obviously the information overload problem that all of us are familiar with. There's so much of information floating around, whether it's scientific, unscientific. People have access to more information than they have ever had at any time in history. Even if we were to discount all of the general material or information that pervades all our social media and social networking platforms, etc., and just focus even on vetted, reviewed scientific publishing and content, there also you have an overload problem. Because if you simply do a search on Google, you will get many thousands or even sometimes millions of hits, no matter which academic topic you're looking at. There also you have to, and the researcher now has a twin problem. Rather than moving from a situation where they had difficulty in accessing resources, you need to now be very selective about what you are actually using for your research. And to help you with that, you probably need to have a lot more synthesis in terms of the information that you actually need. Using artificial intelligence tools, we've basically created two tools about which I'll show you in a minute, a couple of illustrations. One is an auto summarization tool, which we use to sort of cluster, first of all to select and then to cluster and identify key information around a particular subject. And and as I mentioned earlier, this is a synthesized approach, which will then lead to the reader or the scientist or the researcher receiving a very coherent piece of information that they can use to begin or continue their research. The next part is to use that tool also as a service to authors, which which also I will show you in a second. This is actually used to compile the content in a way as a service to authors without actually, there are no charges. Even author requests that the tool has to be used to collect information in a particular area that he's researching. This is something that we can actually look into in the form of a title which will use this particular AI service as a background. In addition, we want to also strengthen the capability for seamless and integrated access of content. It is a new world. People access content not just in the traditional ways of looking at and reading books and hard pages. They want videos, they want virtual reality in it, they want their research data, etc., to be easily accessible and supporting it. They want courses, for instance, to be integrated to books. There are a number of so many of these things. I won't show them here, but these are also things in areas in which Shri is working quite closely with researchers and authors. And of course, the last is, of course, content access. This is also an important point where has been a long-standing requirement that many of scientific communication primarily happens in 2 or 3 key languages: English, German, etc. So and Shri being a publisher both in English and German, a few years ago we started looking into how we could actually translate it. Translation services, as you know, especially for scientific content and specialized content, tends to be expensive. Many authors will have trouble, of course, finding the right kind of funding for it unless they are clearly supported. So our goal and objective was to develop something which basically does this translation in a very quick form, but at a relatively very little or almost no cost. Let me just go quickly onto the examples that I showed. I will show two of them here. One is the auto-summarization tool that I spoke about, where you cluster and summarize existing content using a human-machine interaction. The problem that it solves for authors, of course, is that it helps to speed up the content creation process. It gives you a quickly machine-written, faster overview. I'm not certain if some of you may recall that a couple of years ago, it was definitely pre-pandemic, we experimented with an artificial intelligence written title. It was not, and that was what set us out on this particular journey. And as the machine learns to actually understand these concepts a lot more as we go forward. And of course, it will also identify gaps in the content. Where information is existing, where it is not existing, and try to supplement that. You can actually generate auto-generated tables of contents, again, looking at missing literature, etc. And you can even create hybrid books, which is created by the machine, but vetted and signed off by human authors. The managing in the information overload is then something that this particular kind of technology addresses very closely. Just want to show you very quickly an example of this one AI-generated literature overview. It's the title of the Climate, Planetary, and Evolutionary Sciences. The entire book was actually put together by a machine generator. Looking at content which existed in these particular subjects and areas, and of course there was an editor, obviously, who oversaw that project, but and gave it an overview. So this was our second title, which was entirely machine driven, but of course with a quality vetting by a human author. Going on to a second example, which I mentioned also, this is the auto translation project that I mentioned. What at Springer Nature we are doing is basically using an AI-based translation service. We collaborate very closely with a company known as DeepL. This is a German-Polish company started by a few entrepreneurs, students, I think, from universities, etc. And they have created a translation engine, which in many subject areas, at least for me personally, is probably one of currently the best available in terms of understanding complex concepts. Complex concepts is what you need translated when you're trying to translate scientific or scholarly or social science literature. You can see on your right side a couple of examples of books that we translated: English to German, German to English. Mathematics is beautiful. Mathematics is shown. And we try to look at the possibility of bringing down access barriers here by expanding the audience as much as possible for authors. So a lot of literature potentially is available in a particular language, which restricts the ability of researchers and scientists worldwide to access it. And of course, this is cost saving and time saving. Translations have traditionally been very time-consuming businesses. You have to look at the exactness of it. A great deal of that is actually sorted by this artificial intelligence-based translator. So we completed a pilot phase in 2020, and we are in the process of scaling it by looking at present, most of this is looking at German to English and English to German. But importantly, what we have done is also that we are offering it as an author service, and we have translated our first titles, which are not unfortunately shown here, but in Portuguese as well. There is a great demand for translation of English or German literature into Portuguese. There are a few other languages, etc., primarily the European languages that DeepL can handle. And at this time, they are also developing further capabilities where it can handle Asian languages. And our next sort of pilots where we have actually engaged in is to do these services actually in Chinese language and in Japanese. We did a test run in Chinese, and the results were reasonably good, at least according to Chinese speakers. And at some point, we have to think that as and when the DeepL machine translator gains the ability, it will simply keep adding more and more languages. And some of the ones that, and my hope is that at some point, we want to get to a point where we are able to translate, maybe not by DeepL, because there are other translation engines there, but we really want to look at the possibility of translating Indian languages also, like Hindi and Tamil, for instance, which are, definitely something which will extend that possibility. This is also something that we offer now as a service to others, depending on the language menus that are available in DeepL. So the 4 languages that I mentioned, English, German, Portuguese, and Chinese are already available, and we're looking at expanding this to Japanese as well. But this is also a process where we take on a lot of other feedback as we go forward, because this is very important in terms of maintaining the quality that we need to. I'll very quickly switch gear and go into the trends that we see in STM publishing. I think many of the sessions which we talked about earlier, or rather which the IGCSR conference had earlier, did speak about open science quite extensively, talked about the benefits that open science offers to everyone. And we all know that from a metrics point of view, whether it's in terms of access, whether in terms of usability, accessibility, etc., the way forward is open science, and it really scores much above anything which is behind any kind of paywall, etc. And the real model for getting to an open science environment, at least according to Shri Nature, is of course the gold open access route. That is not the focus of my presentation here, but I wanted to capture just one little item in keeping with the topic, which is probably something that we do not sometimes give too much of importance to. But this is an area in which a lot of important academic work is actually getting done. And that was interesting. And that is also the reason I was very happy to speak here, because it allowed me to research a little bit in that area, which was and satisfy my own curiosity. So in addition to having great access metrics and essentially leveling the playing field, open science, it appears, recent research suggests that when a firm's involvement in academic communities is high, and scientists or researchers working in those firms actually are able to share and publish their information in scientific journals and books, etc., it actually signals, it enhances and signals a much higher innovative performance for its products which are in development. So what it says is, it's a study done by Young and Slavova, published in Research Policy. When publications lead to products, that's what the study is called. The disclosure of more valuable R&D work in quality scholarly publications and collaborations with academic partners positively affect firm innovation. That's what the study claims. They also have hypothesized that adopting open science strategies can actually lead to innovation that is far more radical, as opposed to those which are only incremental. Of course, early and rapid access to research is fundamental to the advancement of science and discovery. It has already led to many changes. This is again and again gaining ground, and which will be the main paradigm in which all of scientific publishing and how content is written and used will be in the if not already, then definitely the major way of doing that in the next couple of years. It changes how authors and researchers communicate, collaborate, and of course how they advance discovery. Open practices also support better discoverability. I think there were many sessions on discoverability and the use of metadata, accessibility, etc., which went earlier. Open practices and open science, and as underscored by open research, will also help with the reusability of results, etc., which is very, very important in terms of reproducibility and the ability of scholars and scientists worldwide to open and use information without any kind of barriers. Distribution channels are also changing, so that a wide spectrum and not just traditional scientists can actually use the information that we publish, and which leads to, of course, greater societal impact. Just want to touch upon one technological contribution which at Springer Nature we've actually done. This is for a faster review and publications process, which is supported by critical data, is now more essential than ever, as the pandemic taught us. We just needed to get out the best science as quickly as possible, vetted, and it had to be used in labs as quickly as possible to discover the life-saving vaccines, which then had to be provided. I think this is where scientific publishing really came up to, along with library and information scientists who contributed to collecting and getting that data together, so that the scientists can actually work and researchers can create the particular biomedical approaches that led to these developments. Getting the newer data out, enabling it to be understood and reused and reproduced, increased collaboration everywhere. This is very, very critical and key. Springer Nature has a service called In Review, which is a service powered by our partner Research Square, which allows for an opt-in service for select journals where you actually deposit, if you're publishing in that particular journal, that it allows you to social share. And it also allows a sort of peers to comment and annotate and review the article and comment on it, and allows you to even respond to it as the article is in a formal peer review process. So you gain a lot of wider community insights without waiting for the traditional route of the article going through many rounds of peer review and finally getting published. So you are actually connecting with the world much, much, much earlier to gain further insights. This is the kind of approach, I think, which will be revolutionary in terms of how we actually disseminate content as we go forward. At the same time as we prepare to disseminate, we are already thinking about what is coming next. The next goal that we have also is in terms of supporting sustainable development goals. This is something that Springer Nature is committed to very, very clearly. I just want to very briefly touch upon two projects which we undertook over the last few years to consistently support SDGs and maintain a socially responsible business. These connected projects, there were partnerships with the Dutch University Consortia, and it set out to map the sustainable development goal relevancy, both to society and also how it sort of showed up in the content that it published. So it went back into databases such as Dimensions, pulled content, and then of course used artificial intelligence driven mechanisms like machine learning to actually come up with a mapping year by year about how much of that content could directly connect to topics around sustainable development goals. It also had a second project, which was basically to look at assessing the non-academic usage of content. All of the content that we produce is specialized content. It can be written and used only by those who are very specialized, but at some critical points in history, maybe, and increasingly so, even common people or even policymakers or opinion leaders who have an interest in that content should actually be able to access the content and use the perspectives that researchers offer there. So this was the reason why we initiated this project and worked with the consortia. And the background is, of course, machine learning in terms of using the technology. It was a proof of concept, started the first year with 5 sustainable development goals and then to potentially extend in the following year. We looked at the current, identified the current state of affairs and emerging patterns. AI was trained extensively on a vocabulary which was connected to sustainable development goals, but in order to make it distinguish between this and normal languages, of course, there were other iterations or overlayering with non-optimal, non-SDG based vocabulary also. The results from this is then further surveyed by reaching out to information professionals like librarians and professors and researchers to basically ascertain how SDGs as a key theme is reflected in the content that they are curating and the content that researchers and scientists and students are using. So this included extensive user surveys and, of course, bibliometric analysis of over 360,000 documents and a survey of about 6,000 readers. The spotlight was very clearly on the impact of immediate publishing in terms of making this content available immediately so that it supports the overall goal of making it as accessible as possible and thus leading to greater societal impact of our research content. Just before I end, I want to just talk a little bit about one of the key other focus areas that we have at Shri, is also to support early career researchers to maximize their impact. So a lot of the technology, a lot of the research that we do internally, both in terms of looking at user behavior, looking at potentially creating services, etc., which benefit early career researchers very closely. This is the the part of the scientific community that we want to really encourage. There are a number of services and tools that are available, including training opportunities, or even help with publication planning, picking your journal, and ways and means to amplify the impact of the research that you're doing, which gets it disseminated more widely, which gets it more recognized, which gets it more used as well. I will end here. Thank you very much. And if there are any opinions or questions, etc., happy to take them. But thank you again, IGCAR and the Madras Library Association for having me. Grateful to speak here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anil, for your very informative and technical talk. I would say it's not only you emphasized more on artificial intelligence tools. This matches awfully with the title and theme of the conference, the Living Technology for the Future Libraries. In fact, you mentioned interesting about the auto summarization tools and book auto translation tool. That is quite interesting. Are you supporting Indian languages too? For instance, I want to translate a technical book in nuclear engineering to Tamil, let's say, or in Hindi. What is the scope?
Yeah, that is what I talked about. That is still an aspiration of ours. We are not yet started to support Indian languages, but of course, that is not to say we will not do so in the future. We use a technology called DeepL, which is basically, which is the artificial intelligence, the company that creates this AI for this auto translation. At the moment, they've not started to offer Indian languages yet, but we hope that we get there soon. And certainly Tamil will be one of the languages that we want to look into. So at the moment, I have to disappoint you, but I hope that not for too long in the future.